appreciate you. And if you're new here and you enjoy whispered true crime, please consider subscribing to the channel. I post 2 times a week, on Monday and Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. I recommend using headphones if you would like to hear the gentle mic brushing. Now let's get right to tonight's case. Tonight we are heading to Tennessee. Shout out to all my friends in Tennessee. Many of you have probably heard this case. It is the case of Christa Pike, and it occurred in 1995. So, let me give you some background on Christa Pike. She was born on March 10th, 1976, in West Virginia. Her mother was heavily into drugs and alcohol, and her father was either not willing or able to care for her, so she was raised by her grandmother. But when Christa was 12, her grandmother passed away, and Christa returned to the care of her mother. It was said that at that time, Christa attempted to take her own life. Christa's mother had not changed at all, really. In the 12 years that Christa had been with her grandmother, she was still into that same drinking and drugging behavior. And it was said that her mother was actually the person who introduced her to marijuana. Now, Christa's mother had a boyfriend who used to beat Christa with a belt, and apparently he also essayed her because when she was 13 in 1989, she was removed from the home by Children's Services because of this abuse. But she was returned back to the home shortly after. Now, Christa wound up dropping out of high school, and she got into shoplifting and was ultimately arrested and sent to juvenile detention for a while. When she was released from juvenile detention, she was sent to the Job Corps program, which was at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville, and she was going to study to become a nurse technician. It was 1994, and Christa was 18 years old when she moved into the dorms at the Job Corps program in Tennessee. There she met a 17-year-old guy named Daryl Ship. He was in the culinary program at the school. He had been raised by a single mother and dropped out of high school in 9th grade, and he got involved in a gang. His mother had encouraged him to go to the Job Corps program. Now, Christa and Daryl had a lot in common, and their relationship blossomed quickly. They were both interested in Satanism and the occult, and they bonded over this. There was also another classmate named Shadola Peterson who shared the same was there to study computer technology. Now, Christa got it in her head that Colleen was interested in Tadaro and was trying to, quote, steal him from her. Now, Colleen denied this, and Colleen's friends also denied that it was true. Whether or not it was true, we don't know. It doesn't really matter. But for whatever reason, true or not, Christa was convinced that Colleen was a threat to her relationship with Tadaro. So she told Tadaro and their friend Shadola that Colleen needed to be, quote, sacrificed in the name of Satan, end quote. So on January 11th, Christa told a friend of hers named Kim that she planned on killing Colleen because, quote, she just felt mean that day, end quote. And of course, Kim didn't really believe it, she just thought it was talk. But the next night, on January 12th, 1995, Christa armed herself with a box cutter and a miniature meat cleaver. And she told Colleen that she had some marijuana hidden in the woods that she would like to share with her. Kind of like a peace offering, acting like everything was fine between them when clearly, well, you'll find out it wasn't. So she lured her out into the woods, and the other two were there as well, Tadaro and Shadola. And once they got to the woods, Christa and Tadaro began attacking Colleen violently while Shadola served as the lookout. And for almost an hour, they taunted, beat, and slashed Colleen. They even carved a pentagram into her chest. And I won't go into all the details, but it was a very, very violent scene, apparently. And there were several times when Colleen tried to get up and run away, and she spent a lot of time begging and pleading, telling them she would just go straight back to Florida if they would, let her go, and she wouldn't even go back to the dorms and get her stuff. But ultimately, her life was ended when Christa bludgeoned her in the head with a large piece of asphalt. And then Christa took a piece of Colleen's fractured skull as a memento and put it in her jacket pocket. And they left her there in the woods. And the three went back to the dorm. Now the four of them had originally signed out of the dorm, but only three signed back in. And Christa did not keep her mouth shut about it. She was telling everyone in the dorm what had happened. she was still alive. The medical examiner said she had so many wounds on her body that it would have taken him hours to count them all. He said he usually catalogs wounds with letters of the alphabet, starting at A going to Z. But he said she had so many, he would have had to go through the alphabet multiple times to count them all. Now, the police investigated, of course, and they went to the dorm, and they found out that the 4 had signed out and that the 3 had signed back in, so that was kind of a huge piece of information to receive. And they searched the rooms of the remaining 3. They found that Daryl had a satanic Bible in his room, and they ultimately found the piece of skull that Christa had taken as a memento, and they were all arrested. Now, Christa waived her Miranda rights almost immediately and confessed to the crime. But she said that she didn't plan it and she didn't mean to do it. But she was just trying to scare Colleen, and it got out of control. But even her own accounting of the story gave a different picture than that. She had told the police that as Colleen kept begging for her life, it made Christa even more violent. So the more she talked, the more Christa would attack her more violently each time. At Christa's trial, her attorneys argued that her, quote, diminished mental capacity, end quote, caused the murder. Members of Christa's family testified to her difficult upbringing as a way to bring understanding to what made her act like this. The prosecution, on the other hand, had a psychiatrist who testified that Christa had, quote, very severe, end quote, borderline personality disorder. She had a dependency on cannabis and she had depression, but she had no symptoms of brain damage or insanity. There was an expert on Satanism who testified at the trial, and he said that there were some satanic elements to the crime, but it was more of, quote, an adolescent dabbling in Satanism and an act of collective aggression than it was a sacrifice to Satan or a true satanic crime. Christa Pike was ultimately convicted of capital murder and conspiracy to commit murder after just 2.5 hours of jury deliberation. And on March 30th, 1996, she was sentenced to death by electrocution. Regarding the other 2, the jury convicted Daryl Shipp of murder, and he was sentenced to life with the possibility of parole after 25 years. And he was only 17 at the time, so the death penalty was not on the table for him. But Christa was already 18, so it was a different situation. Daryl is still in prison, and he is supposedly up for parole in 2026. Shadola Peterson, who was 19 at the time, testified for the state. She pled guilty to being an accessory after the fact and was sentenced to 6 months probation in exchange for her testimony. Even after the verdict, Christa's feelings remained for Daryl. She wrote him a letter a few days after her sentence, which was confidential confiscated and read at a later trial, and here's what it said. Please write me, I miss you so much. You see what I get for trying to be nice to the hoe. I went ahead and bashed her brains out so she'd die quickly instead of letting her bleed to death and suffer more. And they effing fry me. Ain't that some S? Please write me and tell me what you're feeling. Also, tell your lawyer if he wants me to testify for you, I will. Love you for the rest of my life, Lil Devil. In August of 2004, Christa was convicted of attempted first-degree murder for trying to strangle a fellow inmate named Patricia Jones with a shoestring. And there was another inmate named Natasha Cornett, who was serving 3 life sentences for the satanic killing of a couple and their 6-year-old. She was also involved in the attack, but they were unable to prove it. After the attack, Christa called her mother on the phone and she laughed about it and said, quote, I wrapped that shoestring around her and tried to choke the life out of her. She was passed out on the ground, mama, twitching, foaming at the mouth. Her eyeballs was bugged out so far her eyelids were flipped up, end quote. In March of 2012, Christa was trying to plan her escape from prison, and she involved a corrections officer who wound up losing his job, as well as her pen pal, who was a man from New Jersey, but her plan was thwarted before she was able to actually do it. Now, Christa has appealed her death penalty sentence repeatedly, but has never been successful. The latest attempt was last year in 2023. Her attorneys argued that a recent Tennessee Supreme Court decision showed that age should not be considered in sentencing, saying that, quote, there is no hard line of maturity or difference between the brain development of a 17-year-old and an 18-year-old, end quote. Meaning that she was just 18 at the time, so, it's really not much different than as if she were a 17-year-old who never would have been able to get the death penalty, so she shouldn't get the death penalty either. But the judge denied her motion to reopen her appeal and reduce her sentence, and of course, her lawyers stated they will be appealing this decision. Christa Pike is now 47, and she is the only woman on death row in Tennessee. She was said to be the youngest woman ever to be given a death sentence in the U.S. If she is executed, she will be the first woman executed in 200 years in Tennessee. And that is the case. What are your thoughts? I will share some of mine. First of all, rest in peace to Colleen Slimmer. I can't even begin to imagine the fear and pain that she went through that night. And my heart goes out to her family and friends. Her family has still not been given the piece of skull that Christa had taken, because it is still considered part of the evidence until the case is, closed, which it seems not to be since she keeps appealing the sentencing. So that piece of skull still stays as evidence, and her family says they won't feel closure until they get that skull back, that piece of skull. And of course, every time the case is appealed, they're brought back to the horror sentence. They want to switch it to life in prison, either to grant Christa some mercy, or to say that she's changed, or, something like that, that she doesn't deserve it anymore after all these years. But is any of that true? I mean, she hasn't changed. It doesn't seem. She's still committing crimes while in prison. She is still showing no remorse. It doesn't look like she's turned her life around. And should we show mercy to her? I mean, did she show any mercy to Colleen? When Colleen begged for her life, did she show any mercy? No. Should we feel badly for Christa because she had a terrible upbringing? Well, we can feel badly for Christa as a child for what she went through, but that certainly does not excuse what she wound up doing. And the thing is, every single criminal who commits a heinous, violent act has some reason why they did it, whether it was environmental, situational, genetic. Everyone has a reason. It's just a way that we can better understand a case, but it's not a way to let the person off the hook. Now, when her attorney said that, her being 18 makes her really no different mentally than a 17-year-old, how about the fact that she was almost 19, though? She was due to turn 19 in about 3 months, so she was closer to 19 than 17. So that was really a pretty weak argument on his part. So that is about all I have on this case. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope